The music was soft. Glasses clinked. People laughed in the careful, polished way they always did at company events. It was launch night. The product I had spent 18 months building was finally live, and a huge banner behind the stage carried its name in bright blue letters. Under it were the words "Created by the Innovation Team." But everyone in that room knew who had really carried it. Me. My name is Viola Carter. I had worked at Halden Tech for 4 years. I had been there through every failed test build, every investor delay, every midnight redesign, every weekend loss to fixing bugs that should never have made it past review. Tonight was supposed to be the reward. The rooftop hall was packed with co-workers, board members, investors, and a few local tech reporters. 2 cameras waited near the stage. The city lights glittered behind the glass walls. My boss, Mark Halden, stepped up with a champagne glass in one hand and his easy executive smile already in place. "Tonight," he said, "we celebrate a new chapter for our company." People clapped. I stood near the stage stairs, trying to keep my breathing even. My hands shook, but I was smiling. Because I knew what was coming. Promotion. Director of Product. Mark had promised it 3 weeks earlier. Then he said, "And I want to recognize someone special." He looked past me, straight at Miranda. Miranda stood near the bar with one hand around a glass of sparkling water. When Mark called her name, she gave a small, practiced look of surprise. Too practiced. "Miranda Cole," Mark said warmly, "has shown incredible leadership since joining Halden Tech." The room clapped again, though not as strongly as before. I didn't move. Miranda walked toward the stage in slow, measured steps. Her heels clicked against the floor. She wore a new navy suit I had never seen before, and suddenly that detail bothered me more than it should have. She had dressed like someone expecting to be seen. Mark rested a hand on her shoulder. "Starting tonight," he said, turning toward the investors, "Miranda will serve as Director of Product Development." For 1 full second, the room froze. Then the applause started again. Polite applause, confused applause, the kind people use when they know something is wrong but don't want to be the first to admit it. My ears rang so hard I could barely hear anything else. Director of Product, my job, my promotion. Miranda took the microphone and let out a short laugh. "Wow, I really didn't expect this tonight." But her voice was steady. Across the room, some of my co-workers looked down at their drinks. One person near the back whispered my name. Then Mark looked at me and smiled. A small, careful smile, like he had already planned my silence too. Mark kept talking like nothing had happened. "Viola has done great work on this product," he said. Great work, that was all. Not the creator, not the architect, not project lead. Not the person who had spent 18 months carrying the product through every broken sprint, every missed deadline from other teams, every technical problem senior leadership had not understood. Just great work. Miranda lifted the microphone again. "I'm honored to help guide this product into the future." Guide it. The word hit me harder than the promotion itself. This was the product I had designed. Every screen flow, every security layer, every user path. I had built the pitch deck, trained support, tested the core engine, and sat through investor calls where Mark spoke over my work like it was his. Now someone else was going to guide it. Mark raised his glass. "To Miranda." The room echoed it back. "To Miranda." I stepped away from the stage. Nobody stopped me. Nobody asked if I was okay. Behind me, the party went on. Music, laughter, clinking glasses, quiet executive conversations. But inside me, everything had gone still. I reached the exit doors and looked down at my phone because it had started to vibrate in my hand. A message. From Daniel Ortiz, one of the investors, Just 3 words. Do it now. I lifted my head and looked across the room. Daniel stood near the windows with 2 other investors, but unlike them, he wasn't pretending the night was normal. He was watching me directly. When our eyes met, he gave a small nod. My heart started beating faster. 3 weeks earlier, after a long budget meeting, Daniel had caught up with me in the hallway. He had asked a strange question I didn't understand at the time. "If something unexpected happens at launch," he said quietly, "would you be ready?" I thought he meant technical failure. Now I know better. On stage, Miranda was still speaking. Mark stood beside her, smiling for the cameras like a man standing inside a story he had already won. I opened my bag. Inside was the tablet I had brought for my presentation. The presentation Mark had removed from the event schedule that afternoon, saying, "We're tightening the flow." My fingers hovered over the screen. I could still leave, walk out, go home, update my resume. Never come back. Then the last 18 months came rushing in all at once, sleeping on the office couch during testing week, eating cold takeout over bug reports, hearing Mark say, "You earned this," with enough confidence to make me believe him. My phone vibrated again. Another message from Daniel. "Walk back on stage." So I turned around. And I did. Most people didn't notice me at first. Miranda was finishing her remarks. "Thank you all for believing in this product," she said. "Product, not my product, just the product." She stepped back from the microphone to more polite applause. Mark leaned toward her and whispered, "Perfect." Then my heels hit the first stage step. The sound carried. Mark turned. His smile disappeared so fast it almost felt satisfying. "Viola," he said under his breath. I walked up beside them and picked up the microphone Miranda had just set down. 40 people turned toward the stage. The cameras turned too. "Sorry," I said calmly. "One more thing." Mark moved closer. "This isn't the time." But I kept my eyes on the room. "I think everyone here deserves to understand something about this product." Miranda frowned, confused now. Daniel had moved closer to the front. Several investors leaned in. Mark tried to recover with a thin laugh. "Viola helped build it." I nodded once. "Yes," I said. "I built it." Silence crashed through the room. Not partial silence, complete silence. I turned my tablet toward the projector. The screen behind us flickered, then lit up. My first slide appeared, and in that second, I saw Mark's face change. Not anger first, fear. The first slide showed a timeline, not a vague company timeline, not a team summary, a real one. January, March, June, October, February again. 18 months of work, mapped month by month. Every major phase of the product sat on the screen in clean blocks. Research, prototype, user testing, security rebuild, pilot launch, investor demo, final release. And beside every stage was one name, mine, Viola Carter. The room went still in a different way now. People were no longer shocked by the interruption. They were reading. Mark folded his arms. "What exactly are you doing?" I kept my voice even, telling the full story. Miranda stared at the screen. Her eyes moved from the dates to the notes, then to the names attached to each milestone. I tapped the tablet. The next slide appeared. Design drafts, testing reports, late-stage revision logs, product review notes. Every file showed the same owner, the same editor, the same lead. Me. "This product," I said into the microphone, "was designed, tested, and prepared for launch by one person." Mark stepped forward. "That is not an accurate way to describe teamwork." I looked at him for 1 second, then tapped again. A fresh slide filled the screen. An internal promotion agreement, signed, dated, 3 weeks earlier. Director of Product Development. My name. And the room changed again. A soft murmur spread across the rooftop hall. The document was clear enough for everyone to read. Mark's signature sat at the bottom. The date sat in the top corner. My name sat in the middle, right above the role he had just given to someone else. Mark's voice dropped low. "Turn that off." I didn't move. "You promised this position to me," I said. He gave a tight laugh, meant for the room, not for me. "Viola is misunderstanding an internal draft." I tapped the tablet again. An email thread replaced the agreement. The subject line read, "Launch Promotion Plan." Mark's message was at the top. "Viola, once the product launches, the director position is yours." The timestamp glowed beside it. No one needed help understanding that. Someone near the back whispered, "Oh my God!" Miranda's face changed. The color drained from it. She turned slowly toward Mark. "You told me there wasn't a final decision yet." Mark didn't answer her. Instead, he looked toward the investors, trying to find support. But the room was no longer looking at him like a leader. People were looking at him like a man caught in a lie. Then Daniel stood up from his table, set down his drink, and walked toward the stage. And for the first time all night, Mark looked unsure. Daniel stopped at the foot of the stage and looked up at the screen behind me. He studied the agreement, then the email, then Mark. Finally, he said very calmly, "I think we should hear the rest." Several investors nodded without hesitation. Mark straightened his jacket. "This is internal confusion, and I don't think it's appropriate to turn a launch event into a personnel dispute." Daniel didn't look away from him. "If the launch leadership was misrepresented to investors, then it is appropriate." That landed. I changed the slide again. This time the screen showed the final system blueprint. Not pretty marketing graphics, real architecture, core modules, infrastructure layers, security pathways, release notes. I pointed with one hand while holding the microphone in the other. User engine, data framework, permission stack. Fraud monitoring layer. Each section listed the lead designer, Viola Carter. "These are the systems the product depends on," I said. "I built or led each one." Miranda stared at the screen in silence. Then she turned to Mark. "You told me the whole team built this together." He rubbed his forehead. "The whole team contributed." Daniel looked at Miranda. "Did you work on any of this?" She shook her head slowly. "I joined in April. I sat in on strategy calls, that's all." 2 months. The timeline on the screen began the year before. Now even the co-workers who had stayed quiet were shifting uncomfortably because the truth was no longer hidden. It was projected behind us. Mark tried one last time to control the moment. "Viola," he said, forcing calm into his voice. "We can discuss this tomorrow with HR and the board." "No," Daniel said. Just that one word. But it cut through the room. He stepped closer to the stage. "Tonight is the launch. Tonight investors were asked to applaud a leadership decision. Tonight we get clarity." I tapped the tablet again. The next slide opened into video. Security camera footage from the development lab. The first clip showed me at my desk alone at 11:42 p.m., hair tied back, coffee cup beside my keyboard, 4 monitors lit in the dark. Then another clip. Saturday morning, then another. Sunday night, then another. Weeks of footage compressed into minutes. Each one showed the same thing. Me building, testing, fixing, documenting. No celebration, no spotlight. Just work. Miranda watched in silence, arms folded across herself now like she was trying to disappear. Then the final clip started. It was not from the security ceiling camera. It was from my desk webcam, recorded during a feature review 3 weeks earlier. Mark stood beside my chair in the video. His voice came through the speakers clearly. "Once this launches, Viola, the director's seat is yours. You've earned it." The video ended. Nobody clapped. Nobody spoke. Because at that point, the room didn't just suspect what happened, they knew. Mark's face had gone pale under the stage lights. He looked from the screen to me, to Daniel, as if one of us might somehow undo what the others had already seen. "This was taken out of context," he said. Even he didn't sound convinced. Miranda stepped forward before anyone else could speak. "You promised her the role?" Mark kept his eyes on Daniel. It was a discussion. There were still considerations. "No," I said. "It was a promise." Daniel folded his arms. "Then why did the promise change tonight?" Mark opened his mouth, closed it, looked toward the board members, then toward the investors. But there was no clean answer, and everyone in the room knew it. One of the older investors near the back raised his hand slightly. If Viola designed the product and was promised the role, why wasn't she presenting tonight? I almost smiled, because that was the right question. "I was supposed to," I said. I changed the screen again. My original launch presentation appeared in full. 32 slides, market data, growth strategy, platform roadmap, enterprise rollout plan, risk management notes, post-launch expansion. The exact deck Mark had removed from the event schedule at 4:15 that afternoon. A message from events sat in the corner of the slide notes, presentation slot reassigned by executive office. And suddenly the room understood something worse. This wasn't a last-minute mistake. It had been planned. I let the presentation stay on the screen for a few seconds, long enough for everyone to read it, long enough for the board members in the front row to understand that this was not a small office disagreement. This was a planned removal. A public one. Mark tried to step toward me again, but Daniel moved first. "Stay where you are," he said. It was not loud. It did not need to be. The room had already shifted. People who had spent the first half of the evening smiling into cameras were now watching my screen like it was evidence in a courtroom. Even the reporters near the back had lowered their drinks and raised their phones. I scrolled through the launch deck. User growth strategy, institutional rollout plan, fraud protection updates, retention targets. The investors started asking questions, and this was where everything changed. Real questions, sharp ones. Questions only the person who built the product could answer, so I answered everyone. Mark stood beside the stage in complete silence, and with each answer I gave, the room leaned a little farther away from him. Then Daniel looked at the board chair and said, "We need a private review now." And the board chair nodded. The board, Daniel, and 2 lead investors moved into the glass conference room off the side of the rooftop hall. Mark was told to follow them. He hesitated. That was the first time I had ever seen hesitation on him in public. He glanced at the room as if he expected someone to defend him. No one did. The door closed. The hall filled with low, sharp whispers. Miranda stepped off the stage and came toward me carefully, like she was afraid I might push her away. "I didn't know," she said. Her voice shook. "I know," I replied. She looked down. "He told me this was a leadership announcement. He said you were moving into strategy and didn't want the spotlight." I stared at her. That detail mattered. He had not just lied to me. He had built a second lie around me, around my silence. "How long did you know about the promotion?" I asked. "This afternoon," she said, "maybe 4 hours before the event." That meant he had finalized the stunt after removing my presentation. A few co-workers had gathered near the bar, pretending not to listen while listening to every word. 10 long minutes passed, then 15. When the conference room door finally opened, Mark stepped out last, and the look on his face told me the night was not going the way he had planned. Daniel returned to the stage with the board chair beside him. The room quieted before either of them spoke. No music, no clinking glasses, no small talk, just waiting. Daniel picked up the microphone first. "We've reviewed the evidence presented tonight along with internal records already violable to the board." That sentence hit harder than people realized. Already violable, meaning some of this had not been a surprise to them. Mark stood near the wall now, hands at his sides. The board chair took the microphone next. "The product launch will continue as scheduled," she said, "and the director of product development role will be assigned to the employee who led the product through design, testing, and launch readiness." Then she looked at me. "Viola Carter." The room broke into applause. This time it was not awkward. It was loud, full, real. Miranda clapped too. Daniel stepped toward me and shook my hand in front of everyone. "You earned it." Mark did not clap. He stared at me with a look I had never seen on him before. Not embarrassment, calculation. Like his mind was already moving to the next move. And that was when I understood something dangerous. He had lost the stage, but he had not accepted the loss. Not yet. The launch party restarted, but it no longer felt like the same event. People came up to congratulate me, yet every conversation carried the same hidden question under it. What would Mark do now? Because he had not argued when the board named me director. He had not apologized either. He had simply watched. That was worse. Miranda stayed close to me through the next half hour, partly out of guilt, and partly because she did not want to be alone. A few department leads asked me questions about the rollout plan, and I answered them while keeping one eye on the far side of the room. Mark was speaking quietly with legal counsel. Company counsel. That tightened something in my chest. Daniel noticed it too and stepped over. "Don't let that shake you." "What is he doing?" I asked. "Probably trying to frame tonight as an emotional disruption," he said. "He'll want a process argument if he can't win the truth argument." That sounded exactly like Mark. Win through structure if he could not win through facts. A few minutes later, the board chair announced that I would lead the investor follow-up briefing that same night. That should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like the start of another test. Because if Mark was already talking to legal, then he had not given up. He had just changed methods. The follow-up briefing happened in a smaller conference room downstairs. No music, no cameras, no champagne. Just board members, investors, finance staff, and me. That room felt more real than the rooftop had. Fluorescent lights, half-finished coffee cups, printed packets, a screen that took too long to connect. A real workplace room, my kind of room. I walked them through the expansion plan, post-launch support load, expected onboarding pressure, and the features we had delayed for Phase 2. They asked harder questions than before, but this time I welcomed them. Hard questions were easy when the work was actually yours. Halfway through the meeting, the door opened. Mark stepped in. No apology, no warning. He handed the board chair a folder and said, "Before any long-term leadership decision is finalized, the board needs this." Then he left. The room went quiet again. The board chair opened the folder slowly. Inside was a complaint. Formal, signed. He was accusing me of violating internal security policy by recording private management conversations and storing confidential launch materials on personal devices. For 1 second, I could not breathe. Because the video that had saved me might now be used against me, and Mark knew it. The board did not end the meeting after reading Mark's complaint. That was the first bad sign. The board chair closed the folder and looked at me across the table. Viola, did you record that conversation on your own device? Yes, I said. Nobody moved. I kept going before Mark's version could settle in the room. The webcam recording was automatic. I turned it on during feature reviews after 2 builds went missing from the shared archive last quarter. I reported that to IT at the time. The head of finance looked up. You have that report? In my email, sent the same week. Daniel leaned forward. And the launch deck? Built on my company laptop, backed up to the secure drive. The tablet copy was exported from the approved presentation folder 2 hours before the event. That mattered. A lot. The legal counsel opened the complaint again, slower this time. Mark had framed it as a security breach. But if my files were properly stored and the recording had a documented reason, then his complaint was not a protection issue. It was retaliation. The board chair finally spoke. We're pausing any permanent leadership confirmation until we verify the facts. That should have crushed me. Instead, it made me angry. Because Mark had found a new way to steal time. And in corporate fights, stolen time could be just as dangerous as stolen credit. I barely slept that night. By 7 the next morning, I was in the office pulling archived emails, IT tickets, access logs, and meeting records. Not because anyone told me to, because I knew exactly how men like Mark survived. Not through truth, through the process. If he could slow the board down, cloud the facts, and make me look reckless, then he could turn a public defeat into a procedural comeback. Miranda arrived just after 8 with 2 coffees and a stack of printed schedule changes from the events team. You might need these, she said. I looked at the papers. The timestamps showed that my presentation slot had been removed at 4:15 p.m. by executive office override. Miranda pointed at another line. My prep call with Mark was at 4:22. So he had taken me off the program and briefed her 7 minutes later. Planned, tight, deliberate. Daniel called before noon. The board found your IT report. It's real. Good. Then his voice changed. But Mark submitted something else. What? A witness statement. He says someone from product security warned him you were collecting internal files. I stared at my screen. That made no sense. Because there was only one way a witness statement like that could matter. If someone inside the company was helping him. The internal review moved faster than I expected. By lunchtime, the board had requested access logs from product security, device export records from IT, and the complete event change chain from operations. The company was no longer treating this as a personal dispute. It was now a governance issue. That should have helped me. Instead, it exposed something worse. At 3 in the afternoon, an IT manager I trusted knocked softly on my office door. There's something you need to see, he said. He handed me a printout of access history tied to my project folder. At first glance, it looked normal. Then I saw the pattern. Someone had accessed the launch materials from my folder late at night, multiple times, during the week before the event. Not me. Not using my badge, using elevated executive permissions. Mark had been inside my files before the launch. That meant he did not just remove my presentation. He studied it first. He knew exactly what I had prepared. He knew what the investors expected to hear. He knew what he needed to silence. Daniel called again after I sent him the logs. There was a pause on the line. Then he said, Viola, this is bigger now. How much bigger? Big enough that the board is asking whether Mark manipulated product reporting before the launch. The story had already been twisted once. Now it is opening again. And this time it was no longer just about my promotion. By the next morning, the company felt like it was holding its breath. People spoke quietly in the hallways. Slack channels went strangely polite. Department heads kept disappearing into closed-door meetings. Even the usual noise from sales sounded muted. Then the board called an emergency session. I joined from a conference room with Daniel on video and 3 board members in person. Legal counsel sat at the far end of the table, expressionless. The board chair opened with no small talk. We have confirmed that executive credentials were used to access Viola Carter's launch materials before the event. No one looked surprised except one board member from operations. Daniel added, "Those credentials trace back to Mark Halden's office." I felt my pulse in my throat. For a second, it looked finished, clean, provable. Then legal counsel slid another document across the table. "Before we move further," she said, "there is a second issue." I read the top line and went cold. It was a term sheet, dated 2 days before the launch. Mark had been in talks to sell part of the company to an outside private equity group, and the deal summary described the product as being under new strategic leadership. Miranda's appointment had not just been about humiliating me, it had been part of a sales story, and suddenly the launch party wasn't the end of the scheme. It had been the centerpiece. That changed everything. If Mark had used the launch to create a false leadership story for buyers, then he had not just lied to me, to Miranda, or even to the investors in the room. He had lied to the market. The board understood the danger immediately. The operations board member leaned back hard in his chair. "Was this term sheet disclosed?" "No," legal counsel said. Daniel's face stayed still, but his voice sharpened. So he was shaping executive leadership publicly while negotiating privately. The board chair turned to me. "Did you know anything about the sale process?" "Nothing," I said. That answer mattered because I led the product itself. Any serious buyer would have wanted direct technical review from me. If I had been pushed off stage and out of leadership, then Mark could package the product through someone easier to control. Miranda called me 2 hours later after the meeting ended. Her voice was tight. "I just found something in my inbox from launch week." "What?" "A calendar held by Mark's assistant. It says I was being positioned for buyer confidence optics." I closed my eyes. There it was. In writing. Not just favoritism, not just office politics. A staged leadership lie designed to support a deal. And once that hit the board, Mark would not just lose face. He could lose everything. The board moved fast after Miranda forwarded the calendar hold. Legal verified the metadata within an hour. The message was real. It had been created by Mark's assistant 2 days before the launch and updated twice before the event. The note field was short, but brutal. Position Miranda as face of next phase product leadership for buyer confidence. Keep Viola off the live program. That single line did what the earlier evidence had not fully done. It connected everything. My removed presentation, Miranda's sudden promotion, the private term sheet, the fake leadership story. Daniel called me into the executive conference room that evening. The board chair, legal counsel, and 2 investors were already there. "We're finalizing action," the board chair said. Before I could answer, legal pushed one more packet across the table. "There's another problem," she said. Inside were expense approvals and travel bookings tied to Mark's office, private dinners, closed-door meetings, a consulting invoice routed through a firm connected to the buyer group. He had not just hidden the deal. He had started spending company money to help sell a version of the company built on a lie. And now the case against him was no longer internal politics. It was misconduct with money attached. The next morning, Mark requested to address the board live. He was joined by video from what looked like a hotel conference room. He wore the same calm expression he always used when he thought he could out-talk consequences. "You are misreading strategic positioning," he said. "The company needed cleaner leadership optics for acquisition interest." Cleaner. I sat in the back of the boardroom and felt anger rise so sharply that I had to keep my hands flat against the table. Daniel didn't let him control the room. You removed the product lead from launch, promised her the role in writing, gave it to someone else for optics, failed to disclose a term sheet, and used company funds during back-channel deal discussions. Mark gave a thin smile. That interpretation is dramatic. Then the board chair spoke. No, Mark. Yours was the dramatic performance. This is the record. That was the sentence that broke him. His face changed. Not much. Just enough. Legal counsel informed him that the board was voting on 3 actions: permanent removal from leadership eligibility, formal referral for recovery of improperly used company funds, and disclosure obligations to investors related to the sale process. For the first time since launch night, Mark looked exactly like what he was: caught and powerless. The vote passed unanimously. No abstentions, no delay, no quiet compromise. Mark Halden was permanently barred from holding any leadership role at the company again. His authority was gone. His internal access was cut the same afternoon. His expense activity would be reviewed outside the company. The private equity group was notified that the leadership narrative used during the launch event had been false. By evening, the whole office knew. Not every detail, but enough. Enough to understand that the launch party had not been a messy, emotional scene. It had been the moment a hidden plan collapsed in public. Miranda stopped by my office after the board session. She did not sit down. I keep replaying that night, she said. If you had walked out. I almost did, I admitted. She nodded slowly. That's the part that scares me. Because she was right. If I had left, Mark's version would have become the official one. The buyer would have seen the stage, the title, the smiling photos, and the new leadership story he had built on top of my work. And maybe no one would have questioned it until it was too late. That was the real danger, not the humiliation. The replacement of truth with something polished enough to pass. 3 months later, the product passed 2 million users. This time, the celebration happened in the office cafe on a Thursday afternoon with sheet cake, paper plates, and people still carrying laptops. No stage, no fake spotlight, no cameras waiting for a story someone else wanted to tell. The board made my role permanent that same week. Not interim, not acting, not under review. Permanent. Director of Product Development. Later that evening, Daniel found me near the windows overlooking the parking lot. You know what changed everything? He asked. I gave the answer people expected. The evidence. He shook his head. No, you spoke before the room settled around his version. That stayed with me. Because he was right. The documents mattered. The logs mattered. The emails and recordings mattered. But first, there had been a moment. A very small one. A choice between leaving quietly and disrupting the lie before it hardened. The office felt normal now in the best possible way. Deadlines, support tickets, product reviews, the boring, honest rhythm of real work. That was the thing Mark never understood. People like him loved the show. People like me built what the show depended on. And sooner or later, that difference shows. Years later, new hires still asked about the launch party. The story had changed shape by then, the way office legends always do. Some people remembered the rooftop. Some remembered the screen. Some remembered the silence after I said, I built it. A few remembered how Mark's face looked when the first slide appeared. But whenever anyone asked me what really changed that night, my answer stayed the same. I walked back on stage. That was it. Not the applause later, not the promotion, not even the board voted. Everything that followed came from that one decision. Because the real danger had never been just losing a title. It had been letting someone else write the official version of my work, my role, and the future of the product I had built. Success does come slowly sometimes. Months of effort, years of being underestimated. quiet work that leaves no headline. But sometimes success arrives in one sharp moment, when you refuse to stay silent while someone turns your work into their story. That night, Mark thought the launch was the ending. He thought the room had already accepted what he wanted it to believe. He was wrong. He didn't expect me to walk back onto the stage. And once I did, everything changed.